Hey, it's Nick here, and today I'm just going to be working on a little Linocut. And so, Valentine's Day is coming up, and so I thought I'd do a little themed print, but I have to admit, I don't really see what all the hype around Valentine's Day is. I've been single for every Valentine's Day, and so I've never really seen the need to kind of look any deeper into it. I blame that on my undergrad painting professor. You see, one day I was just working away in the print shop one Monday night, and my old painting professor comes in, and he's just wandering through the building, and he walks in, and he says, "Oh, hey, Nick, how's it going?" And I was like, I'm doing good. I'm just working." And then he goes, "Well," it's like, "are you thinking about grad school?" It's like, "What are you going to do after you graduate?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm going to go to grad school." And then he tells me, "Let me give you some advice for grad school. Don't bring a relationship into grad school. It's just not going to work out. You see, you're going to be growing, the other person's not really growing, and it's going to make a lot of tension in a relationship, and it's not going to be good. So don't start dating until after grad school." And I was like, okay. And then he left. And so I listened to him, and now I'm out of grad school, and I just put off dating for so long because of my painting professor. So if you're hearing this, Aaron, I blame you. But like any good printmaker knows, if you've been in a lot of exchanges, there's a way to work with any theme out there. And so Valentine's Day is usually kind of, you think of a day of passion. There's lots of heart motifs, lots of red and pinks. And so I can work with that. And so personally, I've kind of put aside all kind of dating relationships for my art. And so here I kind of have a literal kind of interpretation of me pulling out my heart and then severing it with these really cool scissors, my golden scissors that I have. They're my favorite pair of scissors. I got them in Minneapolis. There's a store called Wet Paint up there. They were like $20 scissors, which is really expensive for a pair of scissors. But man, they're the smoothest cutting scissors I have ever used, and they're gold. So that's a really big plus for me. Anyway, I should probably talk about the print that I'm working on. And so when I do lino cuts, I like to use engraving tools as opposed to traditional V gouges and U gouges meant for relief printing. I just think that for my style, all the hatching that I do and the fine line work that I work with, these engraving tools do that best. And so I'm planning on this being a 2-color print. And so the first thing I need to do is finish up this black and white layer. This is going to be the key layer that I get to plan the color layer around. And I wish I could just do a big long time lapse of this, but unfortunately I twist and churn this linoleum block so many times that it would just be a big blur of like rotating linoleum block, and you wouldn't really get to see anything. So I'm just going to show snippets of, I think, the most interesting parts of the process. And I do apologize for, it's not always the best angle, because I'm trying to have a tripod really close to it, and when I usually carve linoleum and all these tiny little lines, I'm usually like hovering right over the block, 2 inches away, trying to get the best look at it. And so unfortunately I can't really do that, and so I'm trying to like manage having a camera over my left arm and trying to like not have my head cover up the camera. So when I do lino cuts, I always stain my linoleum black with India ink, and I never really do too much planning. I usually only just do a contour line, and all of the details I just kind of make up along the way. I think that's more fun than just planning out every single line from scratch. And so that's why you see here is just kind of minimal kind of plans for the outline. And then I just sort of kind of peel away this layer of darkness, very inspired by Caravaggio and just kind of this chiaroscuro sort of art style. I really think relief works best for it. Now, unfortunately, linoleum is not the best medium for engraving tools. I do find that the linoleum squishes through the press sometimes, and I lose quite a bit of the detail, so it doesn't look exactly like how I carved it. Wood engraving is the best, but if wood engraving blocks weren't so expensive, then I'd be doing wood engravings all the time. But unfortunately, they're just too expensive. Although in the future, I will be exploring alternatives and cheaper ways to wood engrave, and so hopefully that works out better for me. And so there's no real rhyme or reason to where I start and stop. I just kind of do as I please, whatever I think is the most fun part to carve, and I want to carve at that moment. Sometimes I'll start with kind of what I think is the most frontmost object in the foreground, and I'll start carving that, and I'll start working my way around to whatever's in the background. And a lot of times, I really like this black background look. This is very, emerging from the darkness. I think it's really cool, but for this piece, I want a splash of color, and I think if I have the background black, it's going to be a lot harder for the color to kind of pull its weight and do some work. It's going to really look like it's just kind of an afterthought. And so once I've finished up with all of the kind of the details I don't want to work with, I'm going to carve an outline around the whole thing and then start clearing out some white space so I have some room in the background. And this is where my second layer is really going to kind of go into play. And so once I've got my key layer carved, I need to transfer this over to the second block, which is going to be my color layer. And so I'm just going to do a little test print here, and I'm going to take this test print, and while it's still wet, I'm going to run it through the press again onto my next block, and that'll kind of transfer that wet ink over to the other block, and I can kind of use that as a guideline for the next layer. And so I'm going to take this block with my transfer on it, and then I'm going to do some additions, and once I've got it all planned out, I'm just going to kind of carve according to that plan. And so here I'm going to do a kind of a background color to kind of complement, color in the heart, and just kind of give a little background texture to the rest of the piece. And here I have some birds. I don't know why I think of doves during Valentine's Day. I don't think they're a symbol of, are they? I don't know. Maybe I imagined that, but here they are. And I just kind of have them exploding out of my heart while I just kind of have this feedback noise scribbling back in towards myself. So, setting loose my passions from my heart. And carving the color layers is never really as fun because, I don't know, whenever I have to pre-plan everything I'm going to carve, it's just not as fun. But sometimes when I want to make carving a little bit more fun, I have to carve towards myself, It's just add a little bit of danger, spices up the monotonous task of carving these background layers and following these lines. But I know carving towards yourself isn't for everyone, and so if a genie gave me 3 wishes, I would probably use the first one to increase world hunger, and then I would use my second wish to make it so that anyone whose name starts with the letter M would stab themselves once a project if they're doing a Linocut. But just Linocuts. If it was all relief prints, that would just be too evil. So I'm going to print this layer first, that way it can sit underneath the black layer and really let, just be a supplementary enhancement rather than just kind of overpowering the black layer. And so I've got these really cool inks. I always look for a chance to use these. These are neon letterpress inks. I got these from letterpressinks.com and I absolutely love them. They're really fun to use, but I can't find their website anymore. They just kind of disappeared. And it redirects you to a new website, and it's a little bit hard to navigate. So sorry, I can't really recommend these inks because maybe they don't exist anymore. But I guess that's just how it goes sometimes. Rest in peace, Daniel Smith inks. And so once I've gotten this all inked up, I'm going to take it to the press, and then I'm going to print this layer onto all of the postcards. And you'll see I probably could have used a little bit more pressure, but I kind of like the static kind of quality that it has to it. It gives a little bit of texture and a kind of ethereal feeling to these doves. And so once that layer is completely dry, which was pretty fast because I added a ton of that Cranfield wax dryer to it, we're going to print the second layer. And I really like this Tom Hux Outlaw Black. It's really rich in pigment and it's really stiff, which is great for printing with a lot of detail, because I don't want that ink to kind of goop up and squish into a lot of my lines. But it'll still happen a little bit, but not as bad if the ink was super loose. And I have to add a little bit of this titanium white, just because I find that if I don't, sometimes when I print onto stiff paper, this just straight up outlaw black will tend to bronze. And I'm going to add just a tiny smidge of tack reducer, and again, of course, a little bit of the wax dryer. For anything that I really think is going to be handled by human hands, I like to add a little bit of wax dryer to it. And when I print relief, I like to use a really stiff brayer, about 60 durometer, and so the brayer rubber doesn't really push ink down into those really fine grooves that I've engraved. And I'll usually do just a bare minimum amount of ink to kind of get it inked up, and then I'll slowly kind of build up on top of that. If I have too much ink right from the start, it usually just pushes all of that excess ink straight into those lines, and so it's a very slow inking up process. But once my block's inked up, I'm going to take it over to the press, and then I'm going to take those prints with the first layer on them, get them lined up. And so this is my little registration jig. It's based off of the Japanese Kento registration. It's just going to add a little bottom base that lines up with the edge of the block, and then a recessed kind of top base for the paper to sit in. And it works pretty well for this. For smaller projects with relatively stiff paper, I've never really felt a need to use, nicer registration like registration pins or anything like that. And so, once they've gone through the press, it's the moment of truth, and we can stop and admire it for a little bit, but for not too long, because we've got more to print. And so I went ahead and printed 12 of the colored version, and I went ahead and printed 5 of them in just the black and white. And unfortunately, this camera doesn't quite do this print justice. The colors still look quite a bit muted, but the colors are quite vibrant. And even more unfortunately, these neon inks really don't like to be scanned. They always end up being really muted when you scan them. And so luckily, I did get a pretty good photograph, and I tried to edit the colors about as close as they look in real life. And so if you like this print and you want to support me, I'm running a sale just for this week. And so from today, Friday the 10th, up until probably about Monday the 20th, you can get this print for $20. I'll just send it in an acrylic sleeve and then into a normal envelope, unless you want to pay a little bit extra for cardboard shipping. So you can head to my website at nickfontart.com, or you can message me on Instagram, where I'm a lot more active, at wrinklysacknick. And so hopefully you learned something or you liked watching my process. I'll catch you next week.